Hello, everyone. Welcome in. We're giving it just a moment, allowing people to trickle in. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hello, happy Tuesday. Feel free to use the chat and let us know where you are dialing in from. And we're just going to ask everyone to mute. We will have a chance for discussion. And in the meantime, please just use the chat function. Just share your name, your organization, where you are dialing in from. We're going to get started in just a moment. We still have some people coming in. I see Canada, New Orleans. Hello, DC. Hey, welcome. All right, let's get started. Just a few housekeeping items. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Powdar. Just a few housekeeping items before I hand it over um, to our speaker of the day and our moderator of the day. Uh, please use the chat function to share any resources, and that includes links to reports, you know, any recent work that you've done, and then use the Q&A function to ask any questions for our guest speakers for the day. That just helps us keep a tab on the quick moving engagement that happens in the chat. Please remain on mute. We will ask you towards the end of the call, if you have a question, you are free to come off mute and ask your question. But while the presenters are talking, please do mute yourself and turn on your camera if you can. It's good to see you. And with that said, Heather, over to you.
Hey everyone, Heather Tinsley Fix here. Very good to see you all. I'm so excited to be kicking off the first expert speaker call of the year and the first meeting for the newly minted AARP Employer Alliance. As many of you know, we've been working on migrating or evolving the Pledge program and the Living, Learning, and Earning Longer program to a new single employer alliance program. And we're very excited to have all of you join. All of you are sort of grandfathered in, who've been with either of those programs before. And the Employer Alliance is envisioned as a network of organizations. So it's, previously the pledge was kind of mostly focused on sort of hiring older workers, and we had a job board that was sort of attached to that. But the focus and the interest in topics around all sorts of aspects of the multi-generational workforce has grown. So our new Employer Alliance is more of a community of organizations that are dedicated to unleashing all the generations at work. We know older workers matter. We know they're a really valuable part of the workforce. And we also know that the real competitive advantage is making sure that all of our generations are harmonizing and working well together and unleashing that power of all those different types of experiences and perspectives. I wanted to make sure that in case you were not yet a member of the Alliance, my colleague is going to drop some links in the chat for you to join. If you were formerly a member of the Living, Learning, and Earning Longer Collaborative, please use the form that we're going to put in the chat. And if you were formerly of the Employer Pledge, please use a different form. The reason for that is a boring back-end thing. It's just because of two different systems. So that's the only reason for the two different forms. But anyway, having all said all of that and having all that housekeeping out of the way, I'm very excited to launch into our speakers and the really, really amazing and cool data that we're going to be covering today. About maybe June of last year, we started working with LinkedIn, collaboratively working with them on a sort of a discovery of what we could find from their vast amounts of data around older workers and the value that they bring to the workforce. And so I personally had a really great time working with LinkedIn. They're a fabulous company to work with, and the economic graph is really cool, has a ton of amazing data. So without further ado, I'm going to first start and pass the mic over to Matthew Baird, Senior Staff Economist at LinkedIn and co-author of the report. Matthew, welcome.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, I want to echo that. from the start. I really enjoyed the collaboration with AARP. We had a great research collaboration, and all of you are wonderful and wonderful, not only advocates, but researchers and experts. So yeah, today I wanted to talk about our report, our findings, and really something that's becoming increasingly important for employers, which is the role of older workers and the value that they bring to modern workplaces amidst technological change. So I am a senior staff economist and I lead the economic opportunity
Hey,
research.
how are you? Good.
Uh, sorry,
Yes, I wanted to talk to Michelle because I didn't have an opportunity last week.
gonna
What did you?
thanks.
Thank
Um,
you.
Technology is an evolving process. So that's great, though. Um, yeah, so on our team, I'm on the Research Institute team, and we spend a lot of time trying to understand using LinkedIn's data how the world of work is changing, hiring skills, learning, things like that. And so this research with AARP really sits at the intersection of demographic changes and technological changes in the workplace. Next slide. Um, So workplaces are changing really faster than ever. Employers are dealing with right now is an unusually large amount of change, and a lot of that's happening simultaneously. AI and automation is reshaping job tasks. The nature of work is shifting. We're moving more towards a skills-first hiring world where skills rather than credentials become important signals in hiring. Remote work continues to expand and fundamentally shift how people hire and where they hire them from. And at the same time, for the first time in history, many workplaces include five generations working together. So organizations aren't just managing this technological transformation, they're managing a workforce transformation at the same time. And understand how those work together is not a challenge only, but a real opportunity. Next slide. And so the goal of our report is to point out the value that older workers bring to that evolving landscape, and really to, in the same time, combat against certain myths. And so the first motivation for this is really that talent attraction and retention is expensive. And so understanding this is more important than ever. Um, Nearly half of employers say that acquiring high quality talent is a top priority for them. And this represents a substantial amount of money. The cost of replacing employees range 50 to 70% of their salary. And it's one in five workers who quit a job do so because of poor workplace culture. And so, really, retention and workforce stability are economic concerns and issues for firms to tackle. Next slide. And so this is really where the multi-generational team becomes especially important. And digging into the value that older workers bring in terms of stability, leadership, adaptability, and understanding how that complements rather than competes with younger worker skills. And when organizations combine these strengths effectively, they're better positioned to manage complex changes. Next slide. So let's start to dig into our data and what we find. So looking across hundreds of millions of LinkedIn profiles, we're able to have a really close and careful look into how workers' careers and firms are changing over time. One thing that we looked at is firm retention rates. When we look at workers, a new hire, their likelihood of still being at that firm 1 year later. For younger workers, it's just over 70% in the US. For older workers, 50% years old and older, that increases to 85.4%. And so this is real stability, and it matters because that first year turnover tends to be the most expensive turnover. That's where you're investing a lot, onboarding and helping train, and also helping build that links. And so helping and seeing workers persist past that first year delivers real value to firms.
And
Next slide.
Matthew, just
Yeah.
real quick, I just want to point, because I'm not a statistician, that type of gap, it's a 15% gap. It seems really small, like when you see the two bars, but is that a significant impact?
That's an enormous gap. That's not a really small
Okay.
gap. Yeah,
Okay.
that's a 15 percentage point gap is substantial. Yep.
Okay.
So, and translates into real differences.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Heather. And so we next dug into sort of how younger and older workers compared with each other along different dimensions. And not surprisingly, older workers offer invaluable expertise and experience. So they bring more years of overall work experience. Older workers bring roughly 15 additional years of career experience across firms and industries, occupations, all which help them understand the world of work better and contribute to judgment and problem solving, which to tee up sort of downline results are becoming increasingly important as technology evolves. Second, they bring more years of firm tenure. That's to be expected. We just saw they're retained at a higher rate, and so they end up with more years of firm tenure. That brings specialized firm-specific knowledge and institutional information that improves team outcomes. And third, they bring more leadership experience. Uh, Workers over 50 have more than twice as many years in leadership roles on average. All of these things, their wealth of experience helps them deliver value when organizations are managing the kinds of changes we're seeing now. Next slide. As you're probably aware, LinkedIn is not just a place that you list your profile and put posts, but it's also a professional networking site. That's its origin. And so we often dig into that to understand how people are connected to each other and what that means for their careers. And we built this measure of what we call network strength in earlier work. And what's interesting is when we look at older and younger workers, older workers have networks that are 20% larger, but it's not just larger. They're um, connected to more senior people, people with more social capital, people that are in positions of leadership. That's important. It's not surprising, but it's important because they bring their network with them to the workplace. And stronger networks correlate with increased recruiter engagement and higher mobility. Next slide. On the other hand, we did find some surprising results. Older workers historically and stereotypically have been viewed as having fewer tech skills than younger workers. This attitude that the young workers that grew up with it are more native in these. But what's interesting is the gap is smaller than expected and shrinking. And so the first thing we looked at is the types of skills that people list on their profile and how it's changed over time. And we group every skill of our 40,000 in the skill genome to one of five groups. And what I want to focus your attention on is the disruptive tech skills there. Um, the In the past 5 years, that's been the largest area of growth for both workers that are older and younger. Uh, but it's been a much faster area of growth for older workers, a 25% increase in the share of their skills that they're listing there. So rather than falling behind technologically, many experienced workers are actively adapting alongside that workplace change. Uh, Next slide. And so the multi-generational teams bring and provide value in that AI workforce. Um, and this becomes really important in the context of AI. Older workers are actually more likely to be in roles that are insulated from automation, roles that rely on things like leadership, judgment, and collaboration. But the real value we pitch and we claim is collaboration across generations. Younger workers often help drive the adoption of new technologies, and older workers uh, they adopt those same technologies, but they also help organizations implement those technologies effectively. And so that bidirectional learning is where we see biggest gains. Next slide. Another interesting finding that we dug into is this growth mindset. One of the products that LinkedIn provides is LinkedIn Learning, where we have hundreds of millions of sessions that are being viewed and participated in over time. And here we compare older and younger workers. Again, there's the stereotype about can't teach an old dog new tricks. We're not seeing that to be the case. Not only is this active learning, but it's active learning on a technological platform. And so while there is a positive gap, back in 2022, younger workers were 13.5% more sessions on LinkedIn Learning. That has shrunk to nearly zero, 1.6% right now. And so that is really encouraging for thinking about the growth mindset. And if we look at the types of content that they're consuming, The technological topics for LinkedIn Learning, that gap has also substantially narrowed over time from 31% 5 years ago, sorry, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, to 10% last year. And so the idea that reskilling only happens in early careers really isn't supported by our data. Next slide. Finally, I wanted to call out here, some of my teammates help do research to understanding which companies are doing best overall along several dimensions. It recognizes them for things such as career progression, upskilling, promotion, etc. And what we did is we took the list of the top companies in the US and we looked at the distribution of age of their workforce. And what we saw was really interesting to me. We found that top companies are more aligned with the age distribution of the US workforce compared to non-top companies. They have more representation across multi-generations. Um, they are they they have a representation of three or more generations, every single top company. And so it's not just young workers in these startups that you might think of with top companies. Top companies really are funded on multi-generational talent. Next slide. And so for me, the overall takeaway from this research is really straightforward. As workplaces evolve, employers need different types of strengths at the same time. Older workers deliver experience, adaptability, networks, and technological learning. And so these aren't competing traits across generations, they're complementary. Organizations that successfully bring these together are better positioned to provide resilient and high-performing teams going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I think it's a really insightful. I hadn't thought of framing it that way before, but I think it's really true. You need different skills, but at the same time. And I think that's the power of having multiple generations in the workforce. So thank you so much. I am now going to turn it over to my colleague, Rebecca Parent, Senior Research Advisor. We've worked together a long time, Rebecca. I'm very excited for you to share our latest findings on our survey of employers on AI use in their workforce.
Thanks, Heather. So I want to put another plug in for the LinkedIn report because I think it is a great complement to the data that we collect in a primary way at AARP and the data that you're going to see in my slide deck around perceptions and feelings and perceived experiences, whereas the LinkedIn data is really, it's so helpful because it's what older workers and all workers are actually doing, and they're able to follow that over time, which is a very helpful, and it brings up a more, or it fosters a more robust conversation around some of these multi-generational workforce issues. So if you haven't read it, I would definitely encourage that you do so. So I'm going to be presenting today on two sources of data, one an overview, but then really focus on some of our new data that actually has not even been released yet. So you can go through, Heather, to the next slide and the next. So I'm going to give a very brief overview because if you've been on any of these calls before, I have presented on the older workers and AI data in the past. We have a module that we field annually around AI issues and a number of other modules that I'm also happy to talk about with anyone if you wanted to contact me. But really trying to understand how older workers feel about AI, what they think they know about it, what their needs might be, and then looking toward the future around AI and their feelings around how it's going to disrupt the workforce. The data that I'll be talking about and comparing to the employer data itself is from last year. It was released in May of 2025. We are in the field now with the 2026 data. I expect around a similar release date this year, so around May of 2026. That will have new data. And this is exciting year-over-year data because this is such a fast-moving situation that we have going on with tech and AI. So we see some differences over time, whereas in some of our other work, it's more consistent over time. With regard to the employer data, that's not yet released. It'll be released next month. So you're getting a sneak peek at this data, which is really exciting. In the past, when we could have fielded to employers, and we're really trying to make a concerted effort to have fielded this work and to, in an ongoing way, really talk to employers and get that perspective and be able to compare it to what older workers are saying their experience is like. So we fielded to 1,019 individuals representing employers around their understanding of AI. And this is a pretty robust survey instrument, so it's a lot more, many more results than I'll be talking about today, but around AI adoption, use cases, training, the future of AI, and their perceptions of how it's going to disrupt or not the workforce. So you can go to the next slide. So just a very brief overview of this work on older workers. Older workers have a moderate familiarity with AI in the workplace, but low direct usage. So only 16% had used, even to some extent, AI in their work. In the last, I believe it was in the last, or currently, if they currently use it. There's a pretty big gap between between actual training that older workers are taking and interest in training. It's a 37 percentage point difference between those who've taken a training and those who are interested in training. And we'll come back to that as far as how it compares to employers and what that might mean. They have a cautious outlook around what AI will do to their job and in the workforce 5 years into the future. So there's a fairly even split, like 20 to 27 percentage points around those who think it will only be a threat, those who think it will only be an opportunity. The plurality of around 30% say it's probably going to do both. But I think what we come away from this with is that 24% simply say they just don't know. They don't know enough about AI and tech to really say what's going to happen in the future or have an opinion around it. And again, there are more concerns around AI and its impact on age bias, increasing age bias, than there is in decreasing age bias. The potential is there in both directions, but we see 20% concern that it could increase age bias and only 8% saying they think it will reduce age bias in hiring. Next slide. So again, this is the employer and AI data. We talked to people who represent an employer in a director. Oh, that looks funny. A director position, C-suite. They had to have been in their position for at least 6 months. They have to have some level of decision-making ability around hiring, around training, around strategic direction of the organization. And what we really wanted to step out with here is understanding where older workers fit into this conversation around what are we going to do with AI? What does it mean for our business? How are we going to use it? And what we see here is that 46% say all or most of their decisions around AI include older workers. And by older workers, we mean those who are ages 40 plus. And if we then look to those who say, well, they're sometimes sort of at the table, we move up to 93%. And the tie-in with the LinkedIn report here is around some of those things Matt was talking about, around some of the uniquely human skills, the leadership, the sort of pivots that have happened in industry and occupations over many years of experience, that experience helps to see inroads into use cases for AI for the business that can be very beneficial. And so obviously we would recommend that you have all age groups at the table to talk about these strategic decisions around AI. Next
Yeah,
slide.
Rebecca, before I advance, I just want to let you know, this surprised me. I was expecting a lower proportion of older workers being involved in decisions around, how to use AI, where to use AI. So this was quite encouraging to me.
Right, and I think the other point I want to make here is, and among many of the things that we asked, we went, oh, that's kind of interesting. And then why, or what does that look like if X? And we don't have that level of detail, but it really plants the seeds for next conversations, next surveys of like seeing exactly what people are doing, or even qualitative work and talking to employers and saying, okay, what does it look like at your company? Just to really get this idea of how are these conversations happening? Who's invited to the table? Is it just by job position or job title? Or are there other ways to involve all ages of workers in the conversation?
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. So we saw a relatively positive picture from employers around AI. Again, largely seen as positive. Some concerns exist. If we said, how much do you agree with these statements around AI? And what we see here is agreement there over in the dark blue, where one thing that we saw is So we have entry-level workers, mid-level workers, and senior-level workers. Is that the employers see the risk by level of employment as highest risk for entry-level workers, which we're seeing in some other data, followed by mid-level, followed by senior level at this point. And again, we see, 21% saying we use AI for too many things, 32% saying we don't use it enough, right? So there's even among highly occurring high agreement with some of these items, we see a bifurcation or how employers are experiencing things differently. And some of that will be in the report as well around like company size and so forth. And then one thing I wanted to know is the 30% who say, the reality of AI hasn't met the promise of AI. And so one of the questions there is like, okay, why? Is it because you don't know what are good use cases for your type of industry? So really, the goal is that then we might dig into some of those in the future. So next slide. So in this side, excuse me, when we talk about training with employers, we found that 83% said that they've provided training on AI, which is great. And then we wanted to understand eligibility and then uptake and whether training was mandatory or optional among the different levels of employees. And you can see that when offered, it's mostly mandatory. But when you have that optional section, again, a follow-up question is, okay, who are the people for whom it's optional? Is it different within the organization, or is it just organization-wide but different companies? And so, it's recognizing your workforce and what they might need, and making sure you're always like keyed into hearing from your employees on what they might need. But one of the things I did want to highlight on this slide is those numbers in parentheses underneath entry, mid, and senior level employees is 77% of entry level eligible for training, 94% of mid-level employees eligible for training, and 85% of senior levels eligible. So large majority are eligible. But who are those people? That's who you want. Who are the 23% of entry-level employees who are not eligible? Who are the 15% of senior-level employees who are not eligible? And what are we missing by not opening training up to as many people in as many types of jobs and as many age groups as we possibly can? I think that I would argue that then you're missing some of that benefit of what AI can bring to your workforce and what employees of all different levels can bring to the conversation about benefits of and use cases of. So next slide. So as we thought about how these conversations happen around training in AI, we thought this might be something that occurs in professional development conversations. And what we see is that nearly all employers said that they have they offer professional development conversations to their employees, with the large majority saying that they are formal, that there's a formal process, and 25% saying informally. And in those conversations, we wondered, okay, do you talk about AI training? Do you talk about training? Do you talk about AI training? And 38% say always, and 53% say yes, sometimes. And again, as we look at those lighter blue bars of the 25% who have more informal processes, and then the 53% who they sometimes talk about AI and skills development, who are those people who are the sometimes, not the always? Who are the people who get the informal but not the formal? Wanting to make sure that we're incorporating entire workforces, particularly where appropriate, to get the benefit of what are, first of all, in professional development conversations, what are your goals? How do they align with what the organization wants? What does the organization needs? And then around where they can get the types of training that they have access to. And again, another tie into the LinkedIn report, as Matt was talking about, the LinkedIn learning training around AI and tech. We see some of the myth busting there, as he was saying, but we know from a lot of our other research about older workers that we see that people 40 plus and 50 plus in their jobs are saying they still want to grow in their jobs, that they are interested in training just proactively, right? It's not just a response to need, that there is this interest in proactive training. And we see that in the LinkedIn learning sessions that training is happening. The next slide. So we wanted to look a little bit at some of the questions we asked similarly between the older workers and then the employers. And that we see that we called an experience gap. Many older employees haven't taken a training, only 16%. 88% of employers say we offer training. So where is that disconnect? And again, one of the things that we could argue is, okay, then if in those professional development conversations we're talking about training and we're offering it to everybody, that maybe some of that gap might be reduced. And then, it's also about having inroads to the conversations in different ways, and making sure that older workers, know that they can ask for these things, or, to be proactive in asking or accessing training. So next slide. So there's a mismatch between training taken by older workers and what employers say they provide. So 10% of older workers say they've taken AI training. 83% say they provide AI training. So what is, again, digging more deeply into where is this disconnect? If we had an all workers question around training, how much of that difference would we make up between what workers generally are saying? And so is it based on age? Is it based on not understanding their access to training? And so from the employer perspective, is it more about proliferating to your entire workforce that training is available, and the relevance of training to their own jobs, for example? So again, some of these gaps are important to take a look at. And as I mentioned in the AI recap, we saw that 10% of older workers taken training, 47% are interested. So we have that gap as well. So it's sort of noodling through some of these differences, and recognizing that employers know their workforces, but they need to continuously get that feedback. Next slide. So we did ask around, as I said, around threat or opportunity related to both older workers and employers' perspectives about their workforce. So we also asked the employer's perspective about the threat or opportunity of AI generally and to their company. But then as we look, you see a clear difference around employers thinking that AI is going to be a great opportunity for their workforce, and older workers really not being sure, thinking more likely a threat than an opportunity. As I said, the most amount of older workers saying it's probably both, and then not knowing. So sort of recognizing the conversations might need to be had around how we're using AI, what we've done to make sure that it's being applied in sort of like ethical ways, or like across the entire workforce. So definitely a difference in perceived benefit or threat to the workforce.
And Rebecca, this is not surprising at all, right?
No.
Workers are going to have a very different perspective on the threat of AI to their jobs than like an overall employer like leadership would. So this is not surprising to me at all.
No, it was not at all surprising to me. And I think that we'll end up talking a little bit about how to sort of align better, right, with the perspectives of both the workforce and the employers.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah. So again, just an overview on understanding the gaps, and then I think we're going to move to some conversation around this that we can talk a little bit about more. But it's possible that employers underestimate employee anxiety, both generally and by age groups or by level of employee. Again, high confidence in AI among the employers that we talk to, pretty low among the older workers. The need to look at how we're communicating the employers' AI strategies, and that we're offering skills training where possible. Next. And I'll just briefly go over, I highlighted some of these as we went through some of the slides, and I know we're going to have more conversation around making sure that we expand upskilling and reskilling around AI and tech, demystifying AI, highlighting what it can do for the worker's own workday, and then asking for feedback, getting that feedback, making sure that everybody's in the conversation around AI, and then with the accessibility of AI. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Heather for questions.
Yeah. So thank you both. So I want to just ask you, have a bit of a chat with both of you about some of these findings to dig into them a little more. And Matthew, I'm going to start with you. So pulling back a little bit from this particular report with LinkedIn, LinkedIn has a ton. I mean, I would imagine an enormous amount of data. And you're an economist. So how do you, on the LinkedIn Economic Graph team, how do you sort of approach projects? How do you structure the way you dig insights out of that data? Because there's a lot of it.
Yeah, there is a lot of it. And that's one of the reasons I came to this job, my excitement to dig into that super rich data. Yeah, so we leverage the hundreds of millions of people's profiles, the tens of millions of job posts, all of that. That's exactly right. Dig into it to do our labor analysis. And so it's what's so exciting about it is that it's the broadness and depth of it, but also that it really helps us dig into even more nuanced questions like this report, like distributional considerations. So I lead the Opportunity Research Program. We care about career success for all workers, but part of that all is also like differences between groups, gender, race, or in this case, age groups. And so how we come up with the question, it's really an ongoing conversation with our stakeholders. And so I met the AARP team, gosh, a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that. And we're talking about some of our early findings. And we said, hey, it'd be really cool to do some joint research and combine our strengths. And so that really led us to be able to then pitch to each other a few different ideas and settle on what we thought was the right research project.
Awesome. Thank you. Rebecca, also just like a kind of higher order level question for you. So you've got among other qualifications, you've got a PhD in gerontology. So how does that, I mean, this might seem like an obvious question, like how did you end up at AARP? Well, you have a degree in gerontology, but can you talk a little bit about how that manifests at the work you do for like what we internally call our work and jobs team?
Well, so I come to gerontology from the perspective of originally health. But of course, if you're a gerontologist and you are, when you're a gerontologist, you typically come in through a discipline, right? So you might be a psychologist or sociologist or an economist who then focuses on aging. Whereas my mother's a geriatric nurse, and she worked her whole career in skilled nursing facilities. And so then I started working there as like a high schooler and then in college, and many different roles. And that's sort of where my interest in gerontology took off. But so I wanted to get the degree in gerontology so I understood how all the disciplines sort of related to aging and how there's like, I think of it as like the spaghetti. They're all related, and you can't talk about one without talking about another. And so it was an interest in aging and health initially, but then you can't talk about health without talking about finances. And one of as we've discussed, the foundational importance of work in establishing financial security and in figuring out like what your aging life course is going to be, essentially, access to benefits and so forth. And so that's how I apply gerontology to our work and job space. And then also recognizing that there are these many different layers as we talk about work. There's, the worker themselves, and then the meso level of the workforce that they're, or the employer that they're with. And then there's policy overlaying on top of that. So it's very interesting to me to see how all of those different levers impact the workforce. And then, like I said, how foundationally we need to make sure that, we have good quality jobs for all workers, and that that older workers can work as long as they want to work as they age. So that's how I sort of ended up where I am. But yes, AARP was a perfect fit for me, and remains so.
Right. Well, great. Thank you. So we do have a poll we're going to launch really quick just to get feedback from all of you on how much you personally use AI tools to perform tasks for your job. And I'm going to let you take a little bit of time to answer that. And while you're doing that, Matthew, I have a question for you on, well, you kind of covered this. Were any of the findings from our report, our joint report with you, surprising, and what was unsurprising? I know that we were pleasantly surprised with a lot of the results we got.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, part of being a good researcher is admitting your own biases and understanding them. And so I wasn't expecting the finding in terms of the LinkedIn learning and the tech skill gap closure. I was pleasantly surprised by that. That older workers are closing that technology skills gap, fights against a very strong stereotype. And I think just yeah, the actual engagement with the LinkedIn Learning is real data. I mean, so seeing what courses they're doing shows and demonstrates that there's not this huge age disparity in that. In terms of like what was not surprising, I mean, I think that it's not surprising, but it's still important, was what our findings on the gaps in experience, work experience, leadership experience, etc. But as I talked about, it really, I think, dovetails nicely with this technological evolution in companies where the narrative about younger workers leading the adoption of this and older workers coming along, but providing strategic and real life experience that guides that process.
Mm, right. Well, thank you. Lily, you have your hand up. I'm going to let you jump in.
Hi, nice to see you. Lily Yateman with Grace Creative, and we've done some work with AARP in the past on the creative and strategic side. And I just came back from the Century Summit, the Stanford Center for Longevity, and there's some great data that you guys just shared, and there's kind of connects to this conversation we just had. And I'm wondering, Matthew or anybody else, if one thing that just keeps coming up in this conversation is we know that multi-generational workforces are important. We know that hiring older workers is important, that they add so much value and that it creates, better everything. But the data, like the actual data on, hiring more older workers or multi-generational workforces in an employer setting, it doesn't seem to exist. Like teams with companies that have more older workers are more innovative or drive more revenue, like actual business metrics that employers will care about to then say this matters to me, because at the end of the day it's about the bottom line. So I'm just wondering if there is anything like that any Becca or Matthew or Heather, anybody, that anything that you guys are working on or have seen, or maybe it could be something that could help deliver some of those like very simple soundbite data points to answer that question.
You want me to go, Heather?
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay. You want me to go?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I can answer this. So you're right. And part of the problem is that we don't have a robust reporting system on something like this. A lot of the times, what has been done has relied on like proprietary data sources from a for-profit company, and there's nothing that we can, not that there's anything wrong with that, but we can't see behind the curtain, right? And that's what makes it very difficult. We have on multiple occasions tried to get a handle on this very thing. And I have fingers crossed that we're going to get access to some linked government data that can look at employer outcomes. We have data that and in fact, in this very employer data survey, we asked some multi-generational workforce questions about like, what has it meant to your company? And the positive attributes, we asked positive and negative attributes, they far outweigh the negative attributes, right? But that's perception. It's many people easily just like wash their hands of that and are like, I want hard data. And so I can tell you, we are working on it. We've requested access. We have we're trying to get that very thing, but it is hard. Some data from the OECD shows some of these metrics, but it's data that's been, and valued multi-generational workforce should be, relatively even across maybe countries, I would say, but it's not government data that the United States has collected. Other countries are much better at that than we are. So that's where we run into difficulties. I can tell you we're working on it. We're hoping that by 2027 to have a report that can show us some of these outcomes around age mix of firms, and then their specific firm outcomes around growth, around retention, around growth. There are three metrics that are, typical employer metrics.
Productivity,
That's a very long way of saying that we're trying.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Matthew, anything to add there? I mean, you're not a hiring platform, so you don't have that level of access to that kind of data, right?
I don't.
Yeah.
But I do agree with the sentiment. I think it's important to frame equity in terms of the business case. And I think that I think we can. I don't think that's like a fool's errand. I think there is a business case for these equity considerations.
Yeah.
There is a data point. I can't remember where it comes from, but it's a great one about diverse teams overall. But it's like it would be great to have that same data point for
Yeah.
multi-generational teams, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, I've seen Lily, I have seen one report from a company called Cloverpop. They are, they have a product. So their methodology, I would want my, my colleagues to look at their methodology, but they found that as the composition of diverse teams make better decisions, age diverse teams make even better decisions, and geographically diverse teams make even better. So like as you add diversity layers to a team, the quality of decisions goes up, which honestly, from an age perspective, certainly makes sense to me. Um, Animo, you've got your hand raised. So what's your question? Hi.
So yeah, I agree with that question, Lily. I thought that was a great question. Becca, you mentioned wanting to do that sort of thing and hoping to have information maybe next year. I wonder in that work if there could be a layer added of how AI introduction into organizations in a multi-generational workforce is actually more effective. Because I think that would help support the story as well, knowing, for example, as things are more automated or AI can do, what a multi-generational workforce can actually be stronger with having, for example, older workers with the knowledge that they bring from foundation up. And so I think maybe in that, if you're not already doing that, which you already maybe, if there's a way to even segment that to say where automation is being heavily introduced and influence an organization, what is the true impact of outcome in a multi-generational workforce versus otherwise? So
Yeah, and we know that the LinkedIn data shows us that older workers tend to be in jobs that are more insulated from that automation. However, having said that, I know that the landscape changes every 3 to 6 months, right? So I don't know that I mean, there are aspects of everybody's job that will likely be automated, and there are, all the indications show that heavily the emphasis is on augmenting jobs, not replacing them, but that doesn't mean it's not the same for everybody. There's definitely will be some job replacement. So that's something that we need to keep a track of. I want to skip ahead, Rebecca and Matt, to two questions that I had for both of you, which is that because we're having such a great conversation here. So we see from the AARP research that 21% of employers think they use AI for too many things, and 32% think they don't use it enough. And that there's I can't remember the percentage, say that the promise of AI, the reality hasn't met the promise. So there's definitely a lot of still, even now, like a lot of uncertainty about like how, how should we use it and all of that. And so given that, do you think everyone is kind of, regardless of age, kind of in the same boat with regard to the way that they view AI's potential encroaching on their jobs?
Sure. Yeah, I can go first.
Yep, great.
Yeah, I think that it's a great question. And I think our team does a lot of research on the impact of AI on the labor market. And we're definitely finding what you're saying, sort of where a lot of the story isn't massive displacement, at least not yet. And, 3, 4 years in, it's about the augmentation. I think a couple of things can be true at the same time, that employers are still experimenting with understanding how to implement and incorporate AI into their workplace. But generationally, workers are experiencing AI roles differently depending on their occupation. That's really the occupation, the collection of tasks that we do is really the determinant in how exposed we are to the impact of AI. And I think so. It's not necessarily a generational story. You'll hear some news that come out about, oh, entry-level workers are the ones that are really exposed to it. And then the next week, you'll hear a report the other direction. And I think that our attitude is this is a powerful augmenting technology that's not going to, in the near term, just cause this massive displacement. And so, especially along those kind of demographic lines.
Thanks. Rebecca, anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to co-sign the industry and occupation, the sort of difference based on the industry and occupation you're in. And then the other thing is, one of the questions we also asked in the surveys around, like, do you have a trusted provider who can help you determine what's out there and how to use AI? And so I think that employers are in a difficult boat themselves, right? Of training their workforce, getting everybody on board, but then also trying to figure out externally how to use AI and how to bring it in to the best outcomes for the employer, you know, so yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Nigel. Nigel's noting that it's we just haven't figured out the extent of the usage, and just want to highlight the poll results we had, which is that the vast majority of you, 70% said you use AI sometimes, only 8% said never, and 22% said frequently or a lot. I have a question to throw out actually to not the speakers, but the rest of you all, and that is, do you see, are there any nuanced reasons that older workers, let's say in particular, may not use AI as much? We saw that the usage is low. The intent is there, but the usage is low. And I'll give an example from my own personal experience, which is like my writing, my ability to write form sentences, write paragraphs is really important to me. I value it about myself. And so I have declined, I have really tried really hard not to use ChatGPT or I'm sorry, Copilot to write stuff for me because I don't want to lose that skill. So I'm really interested in using AI for other things, but not for that because, like I said, personally, I just care about that fact that writing is a part of my elevator pitch. Like it's a unique skill, or not unique, but it's important to me. So my question to all of you guys, and please feel free to come off mute at any point and provide opinions on this, is: are there any nuanced reasons why that are not about like tech illiteracy? They're not about resistance to change. What are other reasons older workers might not use it as often?
Heather, this is Elizabeth from SHRM. I want to throw out because I was smiling when I was off camera when you were talking about seeing it as one of your superpowers. Because I feel that way too, Heather. What I have discovered, because SHRM has a big culture about using it, is I'm not sure if I'm using it the same way as everybody else, but I am using it to augment or supplement. And I feel like it's actually strengthening my writing. But I had to get over that resistance hump.
Interesting. Any other thoughts on that?
Heather, I'll jump in. From what
Yes.
I've heard from myself and from others, sometimes the resistance is, will that be seen as not my work?
Right.
And so I think there's this authenticity of,
wait, Nemo, wait, hold on, we've lost you.
I'm sorry. I
That's
don't
okay.
know how I hit mute. I must have hit mute. I think there's this, like I have a daughter who went through the college application process and the real issues of, is this your work or how did AI influence your writing? And so I think across the board in everybody's job, there is what I hear some sense of, where's this line of I did this and it's my work versus how I leveraged AI to do it.
Right. Sorry, there's a lot of background noise. I think Cecilia, you might be in a room with lots of other talk going on. If you could just mute, that would be great. Thank you. Mike, your hand's up.
Maybe building on what Nemo just said there, I think one fear people have, and I realize it myself, is you often see at the bottom of ChatGPT and other AI tools, AI can get it wrong. Check facts and sources. And there was a story on Dutch TV where I live recently about lawyers using it, and it can be very time consuming to build up your precedent, your argument, and so on. And there was a case where people had over relied on it incorrectly, and it had been damaging to that individual's career. So I think there is a fine balance between whether is it my work, is it accurate? But I did like what Elizabeth said. I think it has improved my writing skills as well and helping me be more concise.
Right. And Melissa in the chat noted that a lot of times as experienced workers, we've seen lots of tools come and go. And so maybe older workers are waiting to see kind of how much, usefulness it can provide. So I think all those are good insights. Before we go, just want to quickly throw out again to Matthew and Rebecca, are there any particular trends with regard to the multi-generational workforce that you've seen in all the work that you do across multiple different topics? Anything that touches on the multi-generational workforce that you'd want us to know or take away?
Sure,
Start with you, Matthew. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go first so that Becca can have the last word. Yeah, I think there's three insights that I've been thinking about. One of them we've already talked about in the course of today, which is that knowledge transfer is becoming increasingly bidirectional generationally. Sort of the mentorship goes both ways. Tech skills in one direction, where younger workers, the early adopters, may be more likely to be helping upskill older workers, and the older workers, with their experience, strategy, and judgment, helping inform some of those decision making and yeah, pathways. But I think the other two are the increasing relevance and importance of networks. You know,
Mhm.
caveat aside, I work for a professional networking platform. I think the increase of AI is highlighting how important networks are, increasingly so. And so, as older workers tend to have larger, stronger networks, they're in a position to help mentor and guide younger workers through that evolution and development. And then the third, with the LinkedIn Learning, that's just one aspect of a longer, more important trend, which is continuous learning is becoming universal. There's no point at which we stop learning. It's not just early career behavior. Older workers are showing not only the interest, but the capability to continue to reskill and learn. And so I think that shift changes how employers should think about talent investment, and all those together point to real value in multi-generational teams.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a good point because I attended an event with I can't remember his first name, Alex Cass. He used to work for OpenAI, and he's just written a really interesting book called The New Renaissance with AI and in it. And he talked about how it's increasingly important for employers to hire based on a key skill, which is the ability to learn. In other words, yes, you have credentials, yes, you have experience, but the ability to learn is becoming almost more important than any other skill. And I think that's great that, that insight you just provided with that older workers are very capable of that.
Yeah.
Rebecca, any last thoughts before we close
Did
out?
he talk about how to assess that?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
All right.
Yeah. I
Could
know.
be
I know.
a silver bullet, to everybody on this call as well. The last thing I'll say is just to echo what Matthew said around mentoring and the value of mixed stage teams in learning, in career progression for younger employees. We have that data as well that show, how do I act in the workplace? How do I deal with problems? How do I meet other people and grow my career? And then the value that older workers have on those same relationships, that it's really sort of symbiotic and bidirectional. And so I think that's a really positive thing to think about and to end on as well.
Right. Thank you. Well, thank you both so much for such rich data and insights. Really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's attended. All the comments are wonderful. We are excited to be kicking off our year of programming for the Employer Alliance. For Tier 2 members, we're having a call in March, which will be, we're envisioning those as fairly brief, fairly unstructured, but we're very excited to have Philomena from Land of Lakes to talk about her bidirectional mentoring program, their bidirectional mentoring program, how they set it up, what the results have been. It's been around for a couple of years, so that'll be an interesting sharing of best practices, and that's coming up in March. And then in April, we'll be hosting our first workshop. So stay tuned for all of those events. And again, great to see you all, and we will reconvene next month. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all. This officially marks the end of our call.